QSO Today, episode 417, Michael Kalter, W8CI. This episode of QSO Today is sponsored by ICOM America, makers of the finest amateur radios and accessories for your ham radio station, and by Nuts and Bolts Magazine. Welcome to the QSO Today podcast. I'm Eric Guth, amateur call sign 4Z1UG, where I demonstrate the diversity and relevance of the amateur radio hobby and its impact on society by interviewing ham radio operators, many of whom played vital roles in shaping our technology through the amateur radio hobby. And while many people might say, ham radio, do people still do that? This podcast demonstrates through an in-depth interviews just how amazing, diverse, and dynamic the amateur radio hobby continues to be. The 5th QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo comes to your laptop or tablet computer next weekend, beginning Friday night, September 16th, 2022 at 6 p.m. Pacific Time. With a live Ham Radio Workbench podcast, Dan Marlar, K7REX and his Rat Pack, and the first presentation called Building and Operating a 122 GHz Station by Doug Miller, K6JEY. Saturday and Sunday follow with over 50 amazing presentations, our Kumo Space video lounges where you can have an eyeball QSO without ever leaving your QTH, exhibitor booths, and our new project gallery kiosks, a new way for hams to share their projects with the rest of us. Your support of this effort allows us to continue to use the Expo to generate curated ham radio content available on the Expo Vimeo channel. After this Expo, we will have over 300 presentations on just about every ham radio subject. Please click on the Expo banner in this week's show notes page to come to the Expo, any place that you hear this message, without ever leaving your home. Michael Kalter, W8CI, became infatuated with radio as a young boy growing up in rural Ohio in the days of Sputnik and Kennedy's race to the moon. It wasn't until many years later that Michael joined the amateur radio ranks, becoming a leader in the Dayton Amateur Radio Association sponsors of the Dayton Hambention. W8CI tells his ham radio story in this QSO Today. W8CI, this is Eric, 4Z1UG. Are you there, Michael?
This is Whiskey 8 Charlie India, over.
Michael, thanks for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. Can we start at the beginning of your ham radio story? When and how did it start for you?
Well, Eric, I think a lot about it, and it is maybe not so different than a lot of other people's, but when I was a boy, maybe 10 or 11 years old, I was just totally fascinated with radio and television. My father and my grandfathers were both tool makers. And that tool making was okay. It provided a good living for our family. My father subsequently moved up in his company. But at that time, he didn't really have any appreciation for the electrical and electronic world. And so we're talking back late 50s, early 60s, So I just verbally carbon dated myself. But the thing that was just fascinating to me, how all that stuff worked. So I let my grandparents know, hey, if you got any old radios, anything like that, give them to me so I can play around with them. And so I was messing around with radios and antennas and, just totally fascinated with what I could get over the air. And as I got older, I remember buying a Night Kit R55A receiver, and I was just so excited to get that. And I saved my money from a paper route that I had, and I delivered a newspaper 7 days a week, as a lot of us did back in those days to make some money. Well, anyway, thing finally came in the mail, and I was so excited, and the smell was great, even just opening the box, and the picturesque materials that came with it, and I had all these old catalogs, if you probably remember the Lafayette catalogs, the Allied Supply. Just loved those catalogs. And I'd been an Heathkit, the Night Kit, and I just was so excited to get this thing. And then I built it, and it took me quite a while to build it. I went through the instructions, and the instructions were really pretty good. And at that time, I was just learning how to solder. So I put this thing together, and it was in a summer. And I remember, soldering things up, and I would solder, and solder would drop down onto my tops of my legs, and I had shorts on, and I still have the scars from the solder burning into my legs.
We all do.
Yeah, I love it. And, the incense of that time was that burning solder. And, it just smelled so good. And I just felt like, okay, what's happening here? This is what's happening. And this was at the time when Sputnik went over and we were starting to put satellites in the sky. And my buddies and I would stay out late at night and be on this hillside, and we'd just kind of lay there and look up and go, there it is. And the excitement, it just, to me, it's hard to describe, because President Kennedy came on TV and he was talking about, we're going to put a man on the moon by the end of the 60s. I was so excited that we're doing all this technical stuff and listening to the radio. What is all that stuff on the radio? Do you remember, Eric, there was even a song that commemorated our move into satellites, and that was Telstar. And, that was, that was a top song, and that was just wonderful.
I think you're a little bit older than me.
I will tell you, I am 72 years old.
So I'm 65, so I miss Telstar, but I'm going to find the song and put it up, too.
Oh, it is wonderful. But for me, it was such an inspiring age and an inspiring time. And then getting that radio going and listening up and down the bands. I would go up one real slow, then down another. I would just listen and listen and listen. And I would hear all the different sounds and, the news teletypes and all those things and people speaking in other languages. And I was so engrossed by it. So I wanted to get an amateur radio license at that time. So my father, and I was the oldest of 6 children, and my father was the only person that drove. And we lived in a suburban area.
What was the hometown?
Kettering, Ohio. It was just kind of beginning to grow a little bit, and so it was a nice place. It was Kettering, Ohio, is located south of Dayton, probably right now about 10 miles, maybe more, maybe approximately that, to Xenia, Ohio, to where we have the convention now. So anyway, I found a club in Kettering, and I made it to the meetings. I found a bus that would run somewhat close to there, and I went to the meetings. I was just a kid. So when I say kid, maybe 12 years old, 11, 12 years old at that time. So I went to the meetings, and they made me equipment chairman. And I thought, okay, great, I'm part of this. So that meant to bring all this junk home to my house, and my father he went ballistic. So, son, they're taking advantage of you. And that really alienated my father from that organization, and I had to contact him and say, I can't do this anymore. And I'd give and it truly was junk when I look back on it. But to me, it was pretty cool junk. It's like having a flea market in my basement. So then, I got real involved with school, and I couldn't belong to that group. So I did well in school, and then I went off to college and those sorts of things. And then I ended up getting married and having children. Along the way,
you didn't get the amateur radio license in the end in high school?
No, I didn't at that time. No, and I did meet a fellow that had his license, and so he and I talked a lot about it. But he was just so busy, and I was busy with trying to get to the school activities and a newspaper out and everything. So I didn't get it in high school, and I sure missed out on that. I sure wish that I would have.
You had this interest in electronics and radio. Did you have that interest through high school, and did that make any kind of impact in terms of how you chose what to do with your life afterwards?
Well, I discovered I had a real love of science and mathematics, and I pretty much excelled in that. And then I went to my family didn't have any money. I went to an engineering college, which was called General Motors Institute of Technology. And I went there for a couple of years, and then kind of at that time, life took over. I would say parties took over, things like that, and I dropped out of school. At that time, I did. I subsequently went back to school and got a master's degree. And some ways I regret it, some ways I didn't. But I got into electrical and electronic repair and really excelled at that. I felt like I did, and I just loved working on machinery and keeping it running. I mean, I'm talking about CNC type machinery and things like that. And it was really exciting to do that, and got a really good understanding of electricity and electronics. And along the way, I went to I, of course, had to take a lot of classes, and I took a class from a guy who was a ham radio operator. And he said, oh, yeah, the Jupiter, remember the Voyager spaceships that went out? Amazing.
The probes, space probes. There's 2 of them.
Right. Oh, yeah. And just at that time, he was saying, well, they're doing a Jupiter flyby right now, and at my house I'm getting the faxes, pictures of it. And I was like, really? And he was a great teacher of electronics and electronic theory. And I wish I would have kept track of him. But he was much, much older than me. He'd be probably 140 right now. But at any rate, he was very inspiring to me, and I learned a lot from him. And then as time went on, I also had my family, and I ended up I have 5 children, and my wife, she just retired. She was a school teacher. She taught special intervention in the Yellow Springs school system, and she's also a certified Montessori teacher. And so, if you know anything about education, it doesn't pay much. So we're raising 5 kids, living out in the country, and I bought a piece of land that was a beautiful piece of land that I probably was a little bit beyond my means, but I kept it and worked really hard as much as I could, and we raised those children. And they did 4-H, they got into all sorts of things, and what they got into, I got into it with them. So I also became a kind of a community activist in a way. I joined, I was a volunteer with our fire department, got my EMS certifications, and I ran the medical rescue and fire rescue. Well, there was a bad plane crash near my house on a Christmas Day evening, and so I got the call over the radio, and was the first one on the scene because it was right down the road from me. And so the lady a lady who had been in the airplane, she was the only person that made it to a road. And the southern part of Greene County, where I live, about 6 or 7 miles south of Xenia, Ohio, is a very rural area and lots of farmland, trees, and that's beautiful, but it's very rural. So she pointed the direction that she thought the crash was in, and she had 2 children that she said, I pulled my children out of the wreckage and I put them under a tree, but I don't know how they're doing. And so she was totally pretty much hysterical, and there's a policeman there, so I just left and I hiked back, and I finally found the scene. And there was a helicopter buzzing above trying to find them, and there was a fog coming in. And so I had my 2-way radio, which was a fire radio on the fire frequencies, and I was trying to I had to make contact with our dispatcher 6 or 7 miles away to contact the helicopter and let them know just about where I was, and please turn on the spotlights or something so we could get a little bit more visual down there. Well, I found the 2 children, and I didn't have much time to react. One of them, they were both alive, and one of them was crying, but the other one was pretty much unconscious and was fading fast. And I did a rescue breathing on that baby. Was 2 years old for about 45 minutes. And if you've ever done CPR, or what we call rescue breathing, that's very, very strenuous. And so I did that until the rest of the crew could catch up with me. And that was I had to go get counseling after that. I mean, the baby eventually died, but the mother was very, very thankful that I kept the baby alive long enough that she could be with the baby when he passed.
How big of a crash was that? Was that like a passenger airliner, or was it a small plane?
It was like a Beechcraft, maybe a 8 or 10 passenger. I don't remember the model. And he had run out of gas, couldn't make it back. He had an airstrip in his backyard, and he just was short of gas. He couldn't get there. He had a bunch of trees, and it was very devastating to his family. I mean, he passed, and his son died. I mean, I don't want to describe how the carnage looks, but if you've ever been to serious wreckage like that, it's a lot to take. And so at the time, it doesn't bother me, but afterwards, I came home and I was happy to see my children, and but I was pretty shook. And not only did I need counseling, and I consider myself a pretty tough guy. So part of my therapy was, I'm going to get an amateur radio license. And so it didn't take me very long at that time. I did I had a pretty strong electronic background, and it just took a few months, and I had passed my extra and plus the 20 word a minute code. And it was very satisfying to me to do that, but it kept me focused on something other than thinking about that. So it was sort of a therapy in a way for me. And that's what really brought me around to amateur radio, was the frustration of not being able to communicate to the helicopter that was right above me. When, there might have been a way with amateur radio I could have gotten into the repeater easier and then relayed some information. But nevertheless, that didn't happen.
What year was that?
91, I think, something like that, 91.
And so therefore you were in your 40s?
I was early 40s, right. I was an old guy.
I think that's pretty amazing. And as a result of that, obviously you've got 5 children who are watching you survive this event, because I have some experience, unfortunately, with terrorist bombings, that you're able to kind of pull yourself together and do it around something like amateur radio. Did that inspire any of your kids to also try to do that with you?
I have not to do amateur radio, although my oldest daughter has her master's degree from Purdue University in electrical engineering and works for the North American Space Intelligence Center. And she's brilliant. And, she's come over to the house and seen my setup. I have a really nice, I think a very nice setup, and big 43-inch K screens. And she would watch the waterfalls. And she goes, "Dad, how do you know about all this?" And so I just study it. And so one of my son-in-laws was there, who also works for NASIC. And they said, "Well, we're just learning about this stuff now." I think they do electronic surveillance, but she can't really talk about what she does. So she's involved with it electronically and in the communications world. And then the next oldest daughter is, she's a professor at the Ohio State University, and she is an infectious disease physician. Well, she specializes in infectious disease, but she is an internal medicine doc, and she is one of the people that has worked to help set some of the parameters in the state of Ohio with the governor back when COVID was really bad. And then number 3 daughter, she didn't do anything electrical, but she's has her master's in early childhood education. And number 4 daughter is also a doctor, and she works outside of Washington, D.C. in Reston, Virginia. And she kind of got bored with a family practice, and she really likes emergency medicine. I think she likes the stress of it. And so she's working in urgent care and just absolutely loves it.
Or the adrenaline rush of it.
Yeah, that could be. And then my son, who is the youngest, he got his degree in physics, honors physics at the Ohio State University. And then he went to law school there at Moritz Law School at Ohio State, and he is an intellectual property attorney, now works in Madison, Wisconsin for a very high-tech company, and loves what he does. And so I have some amazing children and a very supportive wife. And so that's kind of been my start in the amateur radio career. But when I jumped into it, Eric, I don't get into things part way. If I get into it, I go pretty deep. And so that led me to become very involved with amateur radio in the region, in Hamvention, almost simultaneously. And so it didn't take long after that. I'm a business guy, and is what I end up doing, and that is I did the electronic, but I went back to school and got a master's in business, and so I have done business turnarounds. I have mergers and acquisitions, and have been really successful at it.
And now this message from ICOM America. Heard it, worked it, logged it. This summer, keep your competitive contesting edge with ICOM. Our high-powered base stations cut through pile-ups, letting you work the bands and log those contacts. Contest from the comfort of your home or remotely with the RSBA1 app. The ICOM IC7851 gives you a new window into the RF world, and it's on-air excellence is unparalleled. With faster processors, high input gain, high display resolution, and a cleaner signal, it's truly the pinnacle of HF perfection. Features include dual receivers, digital IF filters, memory keyer, digital voice recorder, high-resolution Spectrum waterfall display, enhanced PC connectivity, and an SD memory card slot. The ICOM IC7610 is the SDR every ham wants. This high-performance SDR can pick out faint signals in the presence of stronger adjacent signals. The ICOM IC7610 is a direct sampling software-defined radio that has changed the world's definition of an SDR transceiver. Its features include RF direct sampling system, 110 dB RMDR, independent dual receiver, and dual digicell. Create your own band openings with the ICOM IC9700. This transceiver brings direct sampling to the UHF-VHF weak signal world. This all-mode transceiver is loaded with innovative features that are sure to keep you busy that include faster processors, higher input gain, higher display resolution, and a cleaner signal. This has become the new de facto standard as a baseband rig for microwave operation as well. Features include 4.3-inch touchscreen color TFT LCD, real-time high-speed spectrum scope and waterfall display, smooth satellite operation with 99 satellite channels, dual watch operation, and full duplex operation in satellite mode. The ICOM IC7300 is a high-performance, innovative HF transceiver with a compact design that will far exceed expectations. This innovative HF transceiver digitizes RF before various receiver stages, reducing inherent noise in different IF stages. The IC7300 changed the way entry-level HF is designed. It is the go-to rig in my station now, and I love it. Features include RF direct sampling, 15 discrete bandpass filters, large 4.3-inch color touchscreen, real-time spectrum scope, and an SD memory card slot. Just know that you'll be very pleased with one of these fine rigs to enhance your contest, DX, and general ham radio operation in your station. Be sure to check out these ICOM rigs and their full line of base stations and portable radios at an amateur radio dealer near you. And when you make that purchase of a fine ICOM rig, be sure to tell your dealer that you heard about it here on the QSO Today podcast. And now back to our QSO Today. You had a manufacturing company up to 2007, 2008.
Very good, I did.
What was that business? What did you manufacture?
I manufactured quartz, I machined quartz, and we would buy our quartz from General Electric, the Special Materials Group in Cleveland, Ohio, and they would mine the quartz, very high pure quartz, in somewhere along the East Coast, and then they'd send me these great big ingots, and I would have to cut them up and then machine them into very high precision pieces that would then line machines that would make IC chips. And so it was very interesting work, and I got to do a fair amount of traveling. And most of my customers were located in California near San Francisco, and or in Singapore, or in Arizona, up in Portland.
How did you find your way into that business? I mean, that seems pretty specialized, and it doesn't seem like an Ohio country lads kind of business.
You're right. It wasn't, but what happened is that I had, worked in different businesses and done these turnarounds, and I got a phone call. You kind of develop a reputation of doing that, and I get calls still. I go to steel mills and go wherever, and run a company for a while and turn it around, or prepare for sale. That's how I got into it, and it's just word of mouth. And so they didn't have a lot of money to pay me, but they said, if you get this thing turned around, we're going to give you I think it started out at 20% of the business. And I said, I'll take that. And I turned it around, and then I ended up buying the business. And then a few years after that, some investors came and they said, we'd like to buy your business. And I wasn't greedy, but I thought, well, this would give me an opportunity to go ahead and go into the same place every day, because I really was ready to do something different than go to the same place every day. So So I sold it. I did well on it, and just went back to doing what I continue to do. And I've worked in all sorts of different industries and businesses, and primarily manufacturing. And manufacturing, I want to say, is manufacturing, and there's a lot of things that follow through in terms of leadership from almost any kind of an organization. And you just look where the issues are, and then you look and work. I like to work very collaboratively to get things turned around. So that's what I've done for a living, and continue to do so.
When you first got your license in 1991, what was the first rig that you put on the air?
Well, it was a TR4, a Drake TR4. And, it's interesting. My mentor at that time, Keith Baker, KB1SF, and I don't know if you've ever heard of him. I always kid him. His call is Keith Baker 1, Satellite Fanatic, and he was president and then treasurer. He's been involved with AMSAT for many, many years, but he was really still to this day, is very excited about amateur radio. And he always told me, pay it forward, pay it forward, pay it forward. But when I first put the thing up, and I got my dipole out and, got this thing cranked, and I was so excited. And he came down and helped me get on the air the first few times. And it was, it was a good lesson to me in mentoring, and then follow through, not like just telling somebody get your license, but actually coming over and helping me. And, to this day, and I work lots. I love HF. I'm on the radio a lot, and I really enjoy it. And although I'm not a contester, I have some good friends that are contesters, but I just have a hard time, sitting there and doing it for a really long time. But I appreciate contesters. And so I like DXing, and it's like the chase. And I like being people coming after me, and I like chasing the DX. And because of that, in my work with amateur radio, I've had a chance to travel around the world for amateur radio. So
I know that you went around the world. You even spoke in Germany for an organization called the National Institute of Amateur Radio. And frankly, I'd never heard of the National Institute of Amateur Radio. And I want to know, was this what you're talking about in terms of an opportunity to represent amateur radio around the world?
Right. Actually, that is in India.
So this is the Indian National Institute of Amateur Radio.
Yes. Maybe I should be clear on my RSET page. Thank you for that. But very amazing group. And they were, they monopolized. They were wonderful to work with, but it was like working a job every day I was there. And they took me around the country, and I spoke with what would be the equivalent of FCC, government people, about how we handle amateur radio in this country.
In terms of what? In terms of like the no-code license?
No. In just getting a license and how long it took. It would take about a year to get a license. Because
of its bureaucracy?
Yes. And not only that, if you were a 13, 14-year-old girl and you get your license and you have these government people coming to the house and why do you want an amateur radio license? Who are you going to talk to? And it became a little bit intimidating. So now they have absolutely turned all that around. They even teach amateur radio in their curriculum, in their I think in the high school curriculum. And they have a very, very vibrant program of bringing youth in and just keeping people interested in amateur radio over there. I'm totally impressed with what they're doing there in India. It's a country that needs emergency.
With 1.3 billion people, it's an amazing market for just about everything because it's 1.3 billion English speakers.
Yes, it is, and it's just wonderful people. I was treated so well there. I really liked it, and I to this day I stay in touch with them, and they come over to Hamvention or they'll bring contingencies over, and that was also part of in my opinion, an international outreach that I saw that Hamvention needed to do. And back in the days, I'm a former general chairman of Hamvention, and I thought that we really needed to reach out to people all over the world. They were coming anyway, so let's make them feel comfortable and let's welcome them. And then let's form this dialogue with different countries. And Yeah, I got to speak in Germany. I think I've spoken there a couple of times, but I got to be a keynote speaker once, which was a very high honor for me. And I basically just spoke on the importance of the brotherhood, sisterhood of amateur radio in the world. And it was how it was incumbent and is incumbent on all of us as to represent our cultures as best that we can, and to maybe take a high-minded path instead of a political dialogue. We talk about what we're doing with our families. What are we, what is going on within our hobby, and it's and I really enjoyed that, and I met a lot of people through that, and so I enjoyed. And I've been to Japan 3 or 4 or 5 times. I forget how many times. A great event over there that they have. They're Japanese in Tokyo, the ham fest they have there.
Japan has, 2 million hams. The number is fantastic for the size of the population.
It is. It is very. I think there are so many countries now that are really excelling. And what I have found is how many young women really or young girls love amateur radio, and they like the different aspects of it, and they want to get involved. And what modes, how can they get involved, and what can they do? Not that I'm any guru on that, but I do see it happening, and I'm really excited that it is happening.
Well, but you've been around a bit. Are there any countries that you can think of in your travels that are getting the kids into amateur radio better than the United States is? And if they are, what are they doing that's different?
I will say Germany's working very hard on it, and I don't know that they're doing anything different. I think that all of us, and in India, well, what India does, it's just different. It's in their school curriculum, and but they have a hard time getting equipment in India. There's a lot of people there, but it's hard to buy radio equipment and getting equipment in and out. I know it's some of my friends. I said, I'll just send you this radio. No, be careful doing that. So but to get back to answer your question, I think the United States does a pretty good job. I think we could do better. I think with the STEM schools, we need as amateurs to be sure that we have a clear-cut message about amateur radio and how youth can get involved. I've seen some wonderful videos over the years. I know, and in Great Britain, they work really hard on this too. And I think most amateur radio communities in the world are working hard at doing this, and where they can. So I can't say one country's better than another, Eric.
I guess I'm not thinking necessarily in terms of better, but it seems to me that I interviewed some kids a few episodes back. I get the impression that, at least in the West, not just America, the kids are so overprogrammed that having time for amateur radio seems like that would be a big challenge. I know here in Israel, I can't imagine that the kids have any time to spend on something like amateur radio with all of the other things that they have to do during the day. So it seems to me that the life is different than it was when we were kids. I mean, we'd come home from school and we had nothing but time to pursue amateur radio or chasing snakes or whatever it was that was our fancy.
I think that is an excellent observation. I have 10 grandchildren, and my oldest grandchild, wonderful young lady who is 16 years old now, she announced to me, she calls me Papa. She said, my friend and I would really like to volunteer at Hamvention. We're kind of interested in amateur radio. And I was totally floored. And so I'm going to make that happen and get her one of those online, because kids are so good at online learning and studying and things like that. I want to get her one of those programs that she can learn at her own pace and kind of help her with that. And then a friend of mine who runs the library system here in Greene County, Ohio, that's where Xenia is. He and I become pretty good friends, and he's a Rotary member, and he had asked me to speak about Hamvention and amateur radio at a Rotary meeting, and I did. He became so fascinated, he got his license. Well, we had a field day event, and so I just did it here from my house and invited some of my good friends over, and and so he came and brought his daughter, and we coached her, how you write out everything. This is what you need to say when you're on the air. And we had it all written down for her. And first few times she was, tongue-tied, but she really wanted to do it. And then after a while, you couldn't get the microphone back from her. Not that we wanted to. And so I had a really nice award that I gave her, and actually from all of us. And so he is just absolutely excited that his daughter is now, she's got her general class license, and he's just recently got a license too. So we're kind of mentoring them to try to make sure that they stay active and thrilled with it. So I don't know how she does that with everything else that she's got going on, but there has to be a way that we get that burning desire into a youth like we had.
Well, I was kind of almost mentally ill with it as a kid. Passionate about amateur radio was an understatement. Let me ask you, though, I'm curious, because you have a granddaughter that may be interested, and a friend who may be interested in amateur radio. Why wouldn't you turn her over to a club or a club class or something like that? Is that something that it's not available, or it's something that you felt for her and her friend was not the right direction?
Well, my granddaughter is a dancer. I mean, she is. They go to national competitions. She would not have time for, like to drive over here for another class. And she has two younger sisters. And it's hard for them all to get out and around. And that's why, because I would love to. I mean, if she was that interested, if I could get her interested in a class, she would do it. But I will say that in Greene County, matter of fact, up at the Expo Center, the Fairgrounds Expo Center, where we have Hamvention, there is our late sheriff, Gene Fisher, was a very avid ham. And he got his license after we moved Hamvention to Xenia. And he was just excited about it. He said, I'm going to be part of this. Got his license, got his general class. He'd come down to my house and hang around, and I put some new beams up. And he said, hey, I want to come down and help you, Michael. And he did. And so he was working on setting up a 4-H club for youth to learn about amateur radio. And it's just now, they've got a space, they've got a beautiful big beam antenna and radios, and they're just now beginning to have the classes. So I don't know that I would love to get her into it. You kind of put me in that's a good question, but I wish I could get her to do that.
I want to take a minute to tell you about my favorite podcast, the Ham Radio Workbench Podcast, with George, KJ6VU, and now joined by Rod, VA3ON, Mike, VA3MW, Mark, N6MTS, and Vince, VE6LK. Every 2 weeks, George and company offer up a status report on the many amateur radio projects on their workbenches and explore projects on their guests' workbenches. This group is project active and prolific, covering many technical areas of amateur radio. So the next time you want a deep dive into ham radio electronic project building, or to learn about technology, tools, test equipment, construction techniques, and the rest, listen to the Ham Radio Workbench podcast, available on every podcast player and channel. Use the link in this week's show notes page to get to the Ham Radio Workbench podcast directly. And now back to my QSO. When you mentioned 4-H, I kind of think of calves and pigs, animals, raising livestock. I didn't realize that 4-H could be a project or a club for ham radio. Is that unusual out there?
Yes, and we are kind of like pioneering it. We're trying to make that happen because in the community of youth, and 4-H wants to serve as many youth as possible, it's good to have, they do some other things that are maybe not quite agriculturally related. You know, they do photography, they do sewing, they do things like that, but they don't do anything quite like amateur radio. But why not? And they like the idea of it. So there's a group that's really working hard to make this happen.
It's my understanding that the Dayton area is, I guess, considered now part of the Rust Belt, meaning it at one time was a center for auto manufacturing or manufacturing of equipment that went into the auto industry. Am I right on this? And then it changed and that industry disappeared?
That's true. However, there are lots and lots of very high-level machining and manufacturing companies that have spawned in this region because of that. And so it's a pretty thriving area, especially out around in Greene County near Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. There's lots of firms that really do a lot of work in high technology things. So it is it's sort of having a rebirth in a way, in my opinion.
What's the impact of the Hamvention on the area?
Well, it is, you can imagine that the population of Xenia is about 26,000. So we bring in about 32,000. And so most of those people will be staying in hotels and motels and will be eating out, spending a lot of money. There's a lot of tax money that will come in from that. And but it's a very positive effect. We work with the community, and the community has really welcomed us. We work with fire departments, police departments, the Convention and Visitors Bureau, and other organizations to be sure that we have a first-class event and that they are comfortable with it. The school system, Xenia Community Schools, closes down in honor of Hamvention, mainly because I don't think they could get their buses through real easy during that time.
Having been there twice, I was here the last time, and I thought that the management of the traffic was masterful, really well done. I don't think it took us any time at all to go from the hotel and get parked and into the area in the morning, at least Friday morning when I went. So I thought it was quite amazing. Are you saying that the regular citizens of Xenia actually understand what this event is and its impact it has on Greene County?
Oh, yeah, they definitely do. I have spoken at numerous events where people want to know, what is Hamvention? What's that about? What is ham radio about? And so I try my best to explain it, that it's, the scientific aspects of it, and in a way that they can all understand it and get it. So that has been very fruitful. And having people like our director of the library system, who's totally supporting it too, and who can speak on it now, and the fire departments, the sheriff's departments, and a lot of those people are getting their license. And you have to remember that a lot of this area here in Greene County is a lot of very technical people. My daughter works at NASIC, which is at North American Space Intelligence Center, which is at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. She says, "Dad, all these people know you. All these ham nerds know you, Dad." I said, "Well, I'm probably one of the top nerds in the area for being known." And so we have the benefit of that happening as well. And we are very proactive in working with the community if they need anything, in terms of if they have like the Air Force Marathon. It's a very big deal here. And we'll have the Dayton Amateur Radio Association will have their vehicle out there, and we'll have a lot of hams working out there at that event to help with communications.
You've been involved with DARA, I think, since 2005. So we're coming up on almost 20 years now. What has the impact been on DARA's membership as a result of moving to Xenia and involving the town of Xenia? Are you seeing that many new hams? Has the club itself doubled or tripled in size as a result of these changes that have been made to an event that goes all the way back into the 50s? I mean, I think the Dayton Hamvention started in like 1958.
Okay, let me correct you on a couple things. It started in 1952, and I started being involved with Hamvention, as maybe I would say at a lower level. And soon after I got my license in 91, 92, I would say. And then I got much more involved because I did business turnarounds and things like that. Hamvention was having a problem in the early 2000s. We were actually paying for somebody to run that whole event for us. Well, that person we were paying was absconding with the money, because we thought, how in the world are we losing money on this event when we have all these people here? And so we took the guy to court, and they asked me to come in at that time to help with trying to get things turned around. It's basically a turnaround operation. So that's when I got really involved with it back at that time. in terms of in the leadership part of it. So that's a little known story because part of agreement we had to make with all the attorneys, was that, we couldn't get money from this guy anyway because we were way low on the list. All the banks and that were after, and evidently he had done some nefarious things. So in order to close a book on it, we had to agree not to talk about it for 5 years. Well, that 5 years went by. And so now I don't mind mentioning it. And that's when we became a totally all volunteer, was back in that time. And so that has really actually been a blessing in disguise, to where we just as, a lot of amateurs, you would say, are running this big event. And we're not counting on professional help other than the professionals, ham radio operators who do this sort of thing for a living. And so that's when I think it really made the change. Now in 2017 or so, right before that, we knew that Hera Arena, where I used to have Hamvention, was going downhill. And we knew that they had a lot of tax problems. As a matter of fact, the very last Hamvention that we had there, I had to write a letter to the local tax collectors and the IRS and say, is there any way you can avoid having any kind of foreclosure on this place until after Hamvention? And I explained all the benefits of Hamvention, and they agreed. So, but then we knew, and we kept all that really quiet. I weren't out telling anybody that. And we really wanted to see them get turned around and maybe get a buyer. It just couldn't happen. And it was so far into disrepair. But I'll tell you, the people that owned the Wampler family was really, really great. So people would ask me, why did you stay so long with them? Why didn't you move earlier? And I thought they would turn it around. But the other thing is, back when we had a guy that was absconding with all of our money, I told you that story, we didn't have enough money to pay Hera. We didn't have enough money to pay the buses and a whole lot of other people, security, things like that. So we had to ask each one of them, can you hold up on for a year till we get this done? And they agreed. So I wasn't very excited to leave, people who had really worked with us when we could have gone downhill. That's a story I don't put out there a lot, but it's a very true story. And it was a very dark, difficult time for. I was president of our club back then. I hadn't run Hamvention yet, but I was president of the club, and it was really a difficult thing. And then to have kind of a gag order for 5 years was even a little bit more difficult because the members wanted to know. Now, you asked the question, though, about membership. And, yeah, we are right around 900 to 1,000 members. We are an international organization. And, we have lots and lots of members from around here. But we have a lot of members from all over the world who really support and want to be part of Dayton. And we have people come in and they want to volunteer all weekend. And, they come in and volunteer, and they're members. And so we're really, really happy about that. But the membership is growing. We were stunned at the last Hamvention. On the Sunday of Hamvention, we had just lines of people wanting to join up, pay dues. And I'm not really sure why, but I certainly appreciate it. And we're happy to have, people join because, I do want to mention one other thing about this, Eric, if I can, is that we don't do this to make a ton of money. We do give money to lots of other amateur radio events, say like scholarships. We give that money to scholarships. We give money to the ARRL. We give money to other organizations that we see that need some money that we can help out. We consider ourselves just a strong pillar in the amateur radio community, like you are, and what you're trying to do with the expo that you're going to put on, and like so many different people do. You're a pillar because you are putting on all these QSO shows, and I think that this is another great step that we're making in amateur radio, is that using the media so well on getting information out about amateur radio, about people, about what's going on. And I used to think, oh boy, there's another guy got a camera and he's going to have a web, show. But, there are a lot of really, really good shows out there. I learned so much. And I didn't realize how stupid I was about a lot of things and about how much more there is to learn about amateur radio. Hope I kind of answered that question.
Yeah, I think so. Do you think that you're traveling around the world representing DARA and the Hamvention and kind of creating this international membership, or at least international interest in it? Do you think that that is what is kind of reinfused Dayton? Because it sounds to me like up until the turnaround, it's very possible the Hamvention would have died a slow but painful death, and it's been kind of resurrected here. I had a great time. What can I tell you? And I don't usually, but I had a great time going this last time, and it was just so well done, so delightful. I hope people aren't saying, oh, God, Eric, he's going on and on. But it was just so well done. So do you think that making this an international event has recharged it?
I'm not going to take any credit for recharging it. I think that we put a lot of focus on marketing and timing and releasing information and making sure that we get the word out there and on an international basis. But I think that the world of amateur radio operators has become a very international just in itself. And I think that people from all parts of the world are very interested. I know when I was traveling to India, on my way to India, I stopped into Doha, Qatar, which is a major airport there. And I thought, well, I'm going to be there. I'll stay there for a few days and go talk to my friends from Doha. And, man, they just opened it. I mean, they were just so happy for me to come. And then they had a couple events later. I bet I flew back and forth from there 8 or 10 times. And I met with one of the emirs, and he was the founder of the Qatar Amateur Radio Club, and he had an entourage with him. And it was kind of funny. He spoke very good English. He had gone to the Michigan State University. And I told him, and he was about my age. And I said, when I was young, I used to dial up and, ride the dial up and down on the shortwave. And I'd wonder, all these people, what are they talking about? Where are they from? And I said, I bet I heard your family's on that radio. And he goes, I thought the same thing when I was dialing up and down. So it's very interesting how, maybe just stopping in and saying hello to people in other countries and how powerful that was. That ended up, our meeting was in several of the newspapers throughout the Gulf. I was like, oh, got my picture on the paper in the Gulf. But it was more for communicating what amateur radio is about. And my feeling and our feeling, I think you agree with me, is the brotherhood, sisterhood of amateur radio in the world. And every time a Hamvention happens, if it's during Ramadan, they don't come because they have to honor. They want to honor, as you do, the Creator in their way. So.
And it's a rough month if you're fasting all day long, every day.
Oh, I lived in Tunisia. I was in the Peace Corps in Tunisia back in the 70s, and I definitely understand. I can tell you stories about that. You wouldn't want to hear it, but it was very interesting. But, what I've met is that generally, people would always say, aren't you worried about going in that part of the world? And you live in a very difficult part of the world. And no, I'm not worried. It's not like I'm going to go out there, make myself a target, and I'm with friends and they'll help guide me to what I need to do. I never really had problems, in pretty rough spots in India or in other parts of the world. And it's just, like you say, have confidence. But I was usually with my friends, amateur radio friends. And I was mentioning that even though they don't come, they'll call me on the phone to say, hey, I hope everything's going good. Good luck with the event. I'll pass it on to everybody. So to get back to your question, it isn't anything that I've done. I think that we all do that because amateur radio is making the world shrink a little bit, especially through media outlets like yours.
We will return to our guests in just a moment. Nuts and Bolts Magazine is a new sponsor and is an amazing resource for new and old hams alike. Click on the banner to get your online or paper subscription of Nuts and Bolts. A new way to show your support of the QSO Today podcast is to buy me a coffee. I consume gallons of coffee to create this weekly podcast. Invite me for coffee by pushing the yellow button, Buy Me a Coffee, on the QSO Today show notes page. And now back to our QSO Today. Are you optimistic about the future of ham radio? I mean, I had this conversation with 416 previous hams. Some are, some aren't. Are you optimistic about the future of ham radio?
Well, being number 417, I don't know if you're taking a poll on this, but my answer is absolutely optimistic. And I think that the reason I'm optimistic is because we are at a new age of innovation, I think, in amateur radio. I mean, can you keep up yourself with all the advancements, all the nuances, all the things that are happening in amateur radio and the new radios and the new things that are going on that make it more exciting? I try to look at every day I want to learn about something. And I am very optimistic, and I'm seeing a lot more younger people, when I say younger, 30s and 40s, getting involved in it as well. And that'll help, offset some of the old guys like me that, how many more years do I have at this? I don't know. I'm thankful for every day. But I'm optimistic, and I'm optimistic when I hear, like my granddaughter said, Dad, Papa, I'm interested in that. And when I see younger people that are kind of looking to understand something exciting and something new, they get tired of flipping through their phones and playing the games. I think that age may be passing a little bit to where they're going, hey, let's do something more exciting here. How else can I communicate in the world? And it's up to us, you and me and every amateur radio operator who's been around for a little while, to keep pushing it. And I am totally optimistic. And I think it holds a real key for in our civilization to understand each other's cultures, plus to even grow the technology to even a more fantastic place.
Certainly the internet has created this ability for us to share almost instantly, right? As soon as there's an innovation, it's out and everybody knows about it.
And I love that. I mean, I just love all the innovations and stuff. It just seemed like years ago, you'd wait a couple of years and there'd be some new radio. It would come out or some new technology. Now it's continuous. I love it. I mean, it is just absolutely amazing, the things that are coming out right now. And to be able to couple, the computer power and the internet power that we have right now and technology that we've learned. I get to meet, I've in picking the Amateur of the Year, I have met some absolutely fantastic people that really are pushing amateur radio to new limits, whether it's and the way we choose who the Amateur of the Year or the Technical Achievement or Special Achievement or Club of the Year, what have they done for the greater good of amateur radio? And it is amazing when I see some of these people come through, what they are doing, and the clubs.
I agree with you 100%. It's so exciting what's happening now. What do you think, though, is the greatest challenge to amateur radio?
Well, I think it's a stigma. It's a shame that in a way that it has that stigma, but it does. It's like the old guy's hobby, and people kind of make fun of it a little bit. But at the same time, when a lot of the books I've been reading lately, there are excerpts, and I like kind of science books, history science books. I've been really into Simon Winchester's books lately. It's just, I listen to audible books, like if I'm out in my property cutting grass or working, or maybe instead of having a radio on, I listen to books. And but I've been absolutely fascinated that amateur radio is getting spoken of a little bit more and in some higher places. But I think we just got to keep pushing on it. And the stigma is there. And how do we change that stigma? I think we change that stigma by understanding who we are and always having taking the high path or high-minded, much like the amateur radio operators of old did. They used to pride themselves on being excellent operators, and their discussion was generally high-minded in it. You're always going to have an element that is not. But I love to tune around. Like if I'm in my shack and I'm doing something, sometimes I'll listen to fascinating conversations that people have that are of a much more technical nature. But that's my bent, probably yours too.
I always felt like a voyeur listening to amateur radio conversation on the radio about whatever technical project that they were doing. I still do that, and the fact that I can now Google it at the same time makes it even more rich.
Boy, it does, Eric. It's but I think we live in a golden time for amateur radio. If you really think about it, this is the golden age of amateur radio. I mean, you look at, if you say the golden age, maybe it's the age of innovation would be better. But I don't want to make it sound old because golden age sounds like something that already happened.
Historically, golden ages come to an abrupt end. So maybe we don't want to put the same golden age on it. But no, I think it's an amazing time to be interested in ham radio and be a ham radio operator. Before we go, I'm sure that you may still have the Drake TR4, but what are you running now?
I'm running a 7610, and I really, really like the 7610. I got a couple 7300s, and I got one of them set up for a mobile operation. But primarily, I have a 7610, and I have a couple of beams up, big JK antennas up at about 75 feet. I have just 3 amps right now. I have I don't use one at a time. I have an ACOM. I think it's the 2100A. I have to tune it, but it tunes so easy and it works so well. And then I have an Alpha 87A amp. And then sometimes if I'm operating from my RV, I have an ACOM 1010, which I have wired for 110 volts. And it's really not that heavy, and I use an inverted V with that. But, that's pretty much what I run. But I sit up on a hill, and I have my tower and my antenna at the highest point, and I live in a rural area. A very low noise.
Nice and quiet.
Yeah, very nice and quiet, unless there's a lot of static in the air. And, I got a lot of little bells and whistles that go with it all, but that's basically what I have. I have other radios.
What is your favorite operating mode?
I actually like sideband. 10 and 20 are my favorite bands. My antenna is a 4 Yagi on 20. There are only 2 on 40, but I really get out and I can hear well. And it's interesting. Sometimes I'll just point that beam. That beam's like a flashlight on that JK antenna. Very, very well built antenna. I don't want to be too much of a commercial, but really like it, the equipment. And anyway, it's neat to talk to, small stations, maybe way up in remote parts of Canada or way, in Europe somewhere. And I don't get into a lot of nets. I do one net occasionally, and that's called the Big Gun Friendship Net. And that sort of started during COVID. And our friends Dave, Alpha 71, Alpha Mike, and Tim K3LR, they pretty much got that going. And that's on the right around 7130 on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And that's at 40 meters. So it's a very interesting net where, everybody's welcome, and doesn't matter if you have a lot of power or not. We just like talking with you. And there's times that those guys hear stations I can't. It's very frustrating to me. But I learn a lot from them, learn a lot listening to them. And, people from all over Eastern Europe and, Europe, period. And then our friend Angel, the KP3R, he gets on there quite a bit too.
In Puerto Rico, right?
Puerto Rico. Oh, what a signal that guy's got all the time. A very friendly guy. And Jim, W8CI, I know you know him, up in Pennsylvania. He's Mr. Antenna. And those guys are so positive. And to me, I love talking to people that are positive and excited about life, excited about learning, and then can just, maybe take a slamming and keep on hamming.
I like that. Do you have advice that you'd give to new returning hams to the hobby?
Get on the air. If you have questions, call me. Get a hold of a ham friend. And I even tell my buddies, I said, we talk about this a lot in the club. Hey, we've got to mentor. We've got to help. Just because somebody got their license, we help them, and we, come over to the house, jump on. Let's see what it's like to jump on a bigger station. And then here's how I operate. How do you operate? And then coach them. And that's it. That's basically it. And then, don't just get something and blindly ask us first, because probably like a lot of hands, I went out and bought stuff and I thought, well, this looks good. That looks good. I'll get it. But I did not have the internet to go to, and probably wasted a fair amount of money doing that until I really honed in on, this is what I want to do. This is where I want to go. And this is how I want to do it. And so I tell that story to new hams too. We can't be afraid to ask for advice. I do. I figure there's no such thing as a stupid question, and I ask them anyway. And I figure, well, they'll realize that when I ask this question that I'm not a hotshot amateur radio operator. I don't quite understand this. Let me tell you another thing that I'm doing. You'll probably get a kick out of. When I got my extra class license, I have a very good, at least at that time, an excellent memory. And I am a professional musician. I also do that. I didn't mention that, but it's in the tri-state area. I play music in some fabulous musicians. One of them is a graduate of Juilliard, and the other one is a graduate down at Cincinnati Conservatory of Music. And so we play a lot of stuff that I basically compose, and then we do a lot of performance stuff. But that requires a tremendous amount of memorization. So I spend a lot of time memorizing. If I wake up at 3 a.m, I memorize. And I learned, the point of this is that I got my extra class license basically because I could memorize everything. And remember, I'd read it and go, okay, that's the answer, yeah. But did I understand it all? I don't know how well I understood it. So I recently purchased the, what do they call that? The ham test online. I think that's what it's called for extra class. And I am going back through it just to take out the rough edges. So that's, that's where I'm at. And I've told some of my buddies, and I thought they would maybe make fun of me. But general answer has been, wow, that's a pretty good idea. I said, if you're going to help people and you want to be a good ham operator, there are gaps in my learning I didn't get, and I want to go back and really truly understand it. So I've kind of maybe opened myself up with that, but I'll be truthful. That's where I'm at with that.
Well, look, I think anybody that took the extra class license exam and did the whole thing on Smith charts, unless you're designing antennas and stuff, you may not understand what a Smith chart is after you've taken the test and passed it.
Yes, that's true.
So I think it's a license to learn. It opens a door for you to learn the art of amateur radio.
Yeah, it does. And I hear conversations sometimes that I think on the radio, or some of my friends are sitting around talking, and I got to be kind of quiet because I don't fully understand it. So I learn, I listen, and I ask questions, but I am getting a lot of my gaps filled by retaking this class. As funny as that sounds, but that's what I'm doing. That's my learning process.
I think that sounds great. Michael, this was such a pleasure. I know that we first met at the last date in Hamvention, and I was hanging out in the lobby of the Holiday Inn on Saturday afternoon, and you came in and invited me to the awards banquet, and that's where we met. I had such a delightful evening, and I'm so glad that you agreed to come on the QSO Today podcast and talk a little bit about yourself. With that, I want to thank you so much and wish you 73.
A couple final comments, Eric. I mentioned this before, but I certainly appreciate what you do and what you're doing for amateur radio. And, you can find our information find the information about your event. Will be, I think today it should be up on our website. I wish you all the luck in the world. And I think that we all have to support each other and whatever we're trying to do, the betterment of amateur radio. And I support what you're doing. And I wish you all the success in the world with that. And I'm truly honored that you would want to know about my life. So I wish you very good 7-3.
Thank you. That concludes this episode of QSO Today. I hope that you enjoyed this QSO with Michael. Please be sure to check out the show notes that include links and information about the topics that we discussed. Go to www.qsotoday.com and put in W8CI in the search box at the top of the page. My thanks to ICOM America for their continued support of the QSO Today podcast. Please show your support of this fine sponsor by clicking on their link in the show notes pages. You may notice that some of the episodes are transcribed into written text. If you'd like to sponsor this or any of the other episodes into written text, click on the transcribe button at the top of the show notes page. Support the QSO Today podcast by first joining the QSO Today email list by pressing the subscribe buttons on the show notes pages. I will not spam you or share your email address with anyone. Become a listener sponsor monthly or annually by clicking on the sponsor buttons on the show notes page. By using the Amazon link on the home page before you shop at Amazon allows Amazon to send us a small commission on what you purchase that further keeps our QSO Today project going. I am grateful for any way that you show appreciation and support. It makes a big difference as we work towards episode 500. QSO Today is now available on a large number of podcast players and now a host of podcast services and applications. We are Podcast 2.0 compatible. I now use the Fountain podcast player to listen to all of my favorite podcasts. Until next time, this is Eric for Z1UG 73. The QSO Today podcast is a product of KEG Media Inc., who is solely responsible for its content.